No, we're good to go.
Okay, great. Then I am calling to order the Finance and Administration Committee and Board of Directors meeting on Finance and Administration for April 22nd, 2021. Happy Earth Day, everybody. Our first order of business is a roll call.
Director Gibson.
Aye. We're here.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Here. I'm looking for now a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Do we have any public comment on the agenda as an approval item, Terry?
No, not on the approval item. I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, then we need a roll call vote.
Oh, Director Bragman.
I didn't hear the item, so I'm going to pass.
It's just
Oh, okay.
approval of the agenda, Larry. Okay.
Oh, all right, then I'll give you a yay.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. All right, this is the time for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Do we have any comments, public comments, Terry?
We do not.
Okay. Then we are moving on to the regular calendar, and the first item is approval of the minutes of the Finance and Administrative Committee and Board of Directors meeting of January 28th, 2021. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Do
Director
we have any
Bragman.
public comments on this item?
Not on the minutes.
Okay, then we need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. The second item is authorizing the general manager to execute an agreement having to do with IT. Do you want to take that item, Ben?
I can take that, Director Kohler.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, Chuck.
No worries. So good morning, members of the board. The first item 2 is we are looking to replace some servers and some storage area network infrastructure that's reached the end of life. We're also, though, taking this opportunity to make some other changes. We're obviously thinking a lot about resiliency of our system. Right now, we've got a server room on site, relatively old building, and we think it would serve our security interests and resiliency interests well if we move that to a co-location site in Rancho Cordova. And then we also have some other items in here that will increase the cybersecurity for the system and the availability for the system in case we did have some sort of an outage. So we're kind of using this item to tie all those things together and really improve our system. We're really, in the past year, especially along with every other agency, we're starting to see a lot more cybersecurity issues come up. So part of what we're doing here is increasing the malware and ransomware procedures for our systems and providing us greater reliability to the district here. I also have Steve Messick here, who's our IT manager, and he's the one who's come up with this plan. We are covering the cost of this within IT's budget. We're just looking for the authority to execute these agreements so that we can move forward with this. So if there's any question that the board has, I think Steve can answer any technical questions that you might have on this item.
Okay.
I have a question, Chuck. When you say co-locate, you're talking about moving it to the district?
So we're talking about moving our servers. So right now, our server room is right here in the admin building. And so as we replace these servers, we're actually going to move these to Rancho Cordova. So we won't have the servers on site anymore. And right now we actually have our backup recoveries at Rancho Cordova, and correct me if I'm incorrect there, Steve. So now this would move everything to Rancho Cordova, and then we back up and recover to the cloud.
And what's Rancho Cordova? I mean, I know it's a city, but what physical facility is this in?
Steve, do you want to jump in?
Yeah,
on it?
it's a company called SunGuard, and it's a formal co-location facility. They've been there several years. SunGuard's got, it's a large company. They've got data centers all over the United States. And the one we're currently in is in Rancho Cordova. So it's very convenient. It's close. You know, it's a high availability center. And so that's the name of the company.
Well, it's not so close. I mean, you know, in the event of a natural disaster, it's 90 miles away, huh?
Well, there's data centers all over the country. So this is Sacramento is a large area for, you know, major data centers for Silicon Valley companies. So it's, you know, it's 90 miles away, but it's out of the seismic area. It's a very stable geographic location. So that's where some of the largest data centers in the country are located in the Sacramento area.
And how much do they charge us for rent to do that?
Yeah, our current rent is $3,500 a month, and we're going to need a little bit larger space and more electricity to add a secondary cabinet. So it's going to go up $1,000 a month. So our rent will be $4,500 a month.
And is this one of those rooms like you see on TV with 10,000 servers?
Yes. Yeah, it's a
just
large facility.
disappears in the distance, huh? And one of them,
Yeah.
or two of them, or three of them are ours.
That's correct.
And how do we communicate with Rancho Cordova?
Okay, so we're putting in a high-speed fiber network between Marin, 220 Nellen and the SunGard data center. And then we also have backup links using SunGard's own communication facility. So we'll have twin, duplicate connections to 220 Nellen.
When you say we're putting in, I mean, we're using somebody else's, I presume, not our own.
So Steve,
Right, yeah,
I just want to note, to use your professional judgment, of course, but if there's anything that would be better said, not at a public meeting, just, indicate that.
Sure. Yeah, no, we're using one of the major communication carriers, fiber carriers in the United States to connect us to 220 Nellen and then all the other facilities, the treatment plants and the pump stations.
What's the downside of doing this? Why would we not want to do it?
Yeah.
Great question. As your IT manager and technologist, there really isn't. The downside would be, the only I think of is potential slowness in some data transactions, but we're putting in high-speed fiber links with plenty of expandability. So if we do have any sluggishness in data, data transfers, especially something large like trying to pull up large GIS maps or engineering drawings, we can increase those data speeds. I think we're going to be fine. I'm basically increasing the current pipe up to SunGard by 500%. We currently have most staff are working from home already, so everyone is already working remotely, and we've not experienced any major slowdowns or problems in performance. So I think we're going to be in pretty good shape.
I mean, one downside, Jack, is 630,000.
Right, money.
Yeah.
I have a question about that, Chuck and Ben. Did this get put out for public bid? And if it didn't, is there an exception for taking it out of that process?
I can answer that.
Yeah, I'll actually let Steve answer that one. Yep.
Yeah, we've looked at several vendors. This type of equipment and this type of infrastructure there's only a few reputable vendors on the planet. I mean, basically Dell is obviously one of the largest server manufacturer on the planet. HP is the second largest, and then there's some third and fourth smaller companies that are trying to move into the market. But we're going with industry leading systems. We did get bids from some other companies, but we've standardized on Dell pretty much for years. We have all Dell desktops and currently have Dell SAN and servers. So they're still the industry leader. So we're going with the best equipment on the planet and the latest technology.
Yeah, no, I don't question the selection or, the whole plan. It's just whether there's a legal requirement to put it out to public bid or not. So, I don't want to hold it up. I'm just trying to put that issue on the table.
It does sound like there were other bids received and evaluated, but I think it is appropriate to consider like for like and compatibility with your existing system and other features when you're looking at several different proposals.
Right, right.
So it may not be the lowest, but per professional services, it's appropriate to make other
Right.
considerations.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
best,
but-
most appropriate.
But even when we do that, Molly, we normally get the list of who else proposed and the prices in the staff report. I can't recall one where we didn't get the options listed out, especially for hardware.
Steve, could
No, maybe we
Yeah,
could get that, maybe we could
absolutely.
get that
I can provide
circulated. We could get it circulated. I'm a little concerned, about putting everything out in the public domain, given the sensitivity of the information. So,
Yes, absolutely.
Steve,
Agree
could
with
you
that.
break out the cost and just explain how a good chunk of it is replacement that would be regardless where it was located, and the actual cost for the relocation relative to the alternative?
Do you want that right now, or do you want me to provide that later, or?
If you think it's sensitive, don't do it now, but
Well, no, I have, essentially, the server, the required replacements, we have aging, our servers and our storage area network SAN system are 10 years old. They're end of life this year. So they have to be replaced, or we'd be, taking on serious risk if we had a hardware failure with trying to get it repaired. We're looking at, out of the 630,000, 460,000 of that is just server and SAN replacement. And then the rest of it is the cybersecurity protection, which is a hardware appliance that provides air-gapped backups, essentially protected backups from any type of cybersecurity attack. So the key.
And what does that mean? Any type of
Air-gapped.
cybersecurity attack? I mean,
So if we had,
they're guaranteeing it won't happen, or are they putting up a firewall that it can't happen?
no, it's not guaranteeing it can't happen, because there's really no way to, it's like you can't protect yourself from that. You can't 100% protect yourself from ransomware attack. But what you can do,
But you can buy insurance. But you can buy insurance.
buy insurance, but insurance isn't going to bring your systems back up if you get attacked and your databases are encrypted. So what a cybersecurity vault is, it's a Dell appliance that protects your back, essentially air gaps, which means separates your backups from your online systems. So if you do have some type of attack and your data is encrypted, you can quickly restore from the cybersecurity vault, and you can store multiple versions. So you could store literally up to the last couple of minutes of transactions. So you can restore your database and then restore your transactions almost up to the minute. So it's very state of the art, brand new technology, and it's designed specifically for these types of attacks that public entities are being victims of.
And Steve, does that mean that you could set up access for the board to directly access our emails instead of getting this forwarding thing?
Say that again. I'm not sure I understand your
What
question.
you may or may not be aware, we do not receive emails directly. There was a problem in the thinking of the last or the one before IT manager that didn't allow remote access. It doesn't allow us in, the board members. So everything
Mhm.
comes to us with a email that's forwarded from the district, which is stripped of its email addresses. So when we get an email from a constituent, we have no idea how to respond. So we have to ask Terry to go in and look at MMWD and tell us what the email address was. Is there a way for us to achieve, the board, to achieve direct access to our emails? And there was remote access to the district. What I was told when I asked this question previously was that was too insecure or something to that effect to allow us to have access.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't see any reason why you guys can't have direct access. I think it'd be something Molly and I would have to talk about. I don't know if there's some kind of legal issue that popped up, but no, from a technology perspective, we can fix that.
Okay, that's a good
Yeah.
use of this money.
Yeah.
Just one other question, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but will this also protect, the operating system, the mechanical systems that go through IT? In other words, I know we've got just data, but we also have operational data, and I'm just wondering if this protection will extend to that so we can't get hacked.
Right. The answer to that is currently no. The SCADA, I think you're talking about the SCADA system, the system that
Okay.
operates the pumps, the treatment plants,
Yeah.
monitors the distribution of the water through the system. That SCADA system is
Steve,
completely separate.
Steve, this is a recorded meeting.
Oh,
You need to be really thoughtful when we're talking about SCADA.
Okay, you know what?
One.
I'll go, we can talk about that offline, okay?
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
I have a question. Why are we paying sales tax?
I don't know the answer to that.
We always pay sales tax.
I thought city agents were exempt from sales tax.
Not from sales tax, no.
No.
Okay. Any other board questions on this item? Do we have a public comment on this item, Terry?
I don't see any raised hands, so no, we do not.
Okay, this is an approval item. So do we have a motion to approve?
I'd move approval.
Second.
Thanks. Roll call vote.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Thank you very much. We appreciate
Thanks a
that. We are turning now to item 3, which is the monthly financial update.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
You're good.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so this will be the financial update for March 2021. So as we always do, we'll start off giving you a snapshot of how the revenues look, and we're through 3/4 of the year, so 75% if we're tracking linearly. So you can see, as you've seen throughout the year, water revenues are ahead a little bit. We're 78.5% of budget, and we'll show you how that breaks down on a monthly basis here in a moment. And then other revenues that we have there, the rents, grants, watershed payments, interest earnings, things like that, are 65% of budget. So our total operating revenues gives us about 78% year to date. Fire flow fee, we've collected $2.5 million, about 55%. So we collect that via the property taxes twice a year. So that's right where we expect to be. That 5% addition is probably delinquencies that have come in. And then the capital revenue, which is comprised of the capital maintenance fee and connection fees. That's at about 68% of budget. So overall, we're tracking right at 75.3% of actual to budget compared to 75% if we're measuring linearly. So we're about dead on the revenue side. And then here we've been showing the board how we look when we start accounting for seasonality. So obviously our water sales, are variable based on the month that we're in, the time of year that we're in. And what you can kind of see here is that there's no single trend. On some months we've been ahead on the actual water sales. On some months we've actually been behind. And you can see in February and March, our water sales were actually behind budget a little bit. So overall, when we look at the water sales isolated, we're about 4% of where we expected to be from a budget perspective. We're about 4% over that. And then service charges are tracking right about on at 98% as we'd expect, and the watershed fees at 93%.
Chuck, could I ask a real quick question?
Absolutely.
Actual is accrued, right? It's not cash.
I'm sorry?
So
Yes,
what the
correct.
actual number are the billed revenue, not
Exactly.
cash.
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
So these include the delinquents, but they haven't paid, huh?
correct.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. If you're billed, you're in here. Exactly. And we'll talk about delinquencies here in a moment. And then here's what we've been showing you on the sales comparisons, and this is in thousands of dollars. And you can kind of see in what you just saw on the previous slide there, you can see that we've been running ahead for a lot of the fiscal year beginning in July. But then when we've hit the last several months starting in January, we've kind of leveled out or been a little bit behind. So if you look at our March numbers, that blue line there is for this fiscal year compared to the red line from last March. You can see that we've dropped off a little bit. And part of that, maybe conservation efforts. Part of that, when we look at the rainfall for March, it was marginally wetter than last year by about ½ an inch, not much. So that could have some accounting for it. But we see that is kind of coming back in line. Whereas when you looked at the beginning of the fiscal year, we were running quite a bit ahead of the previous year. And a lot of that we ascribe to COVID. And
Chuck,
then this
could I ask a quick question here? And I thank you for this data. I wonder, because we're comparing this year to last year, and especially now we're getting into this overlapping time frame when the pandemic was of course hitting, and people are shutting down, but more people were at home. And so there's maybe FY20 is a bit of an abnormality in terms of a comparison. I'm just wondering how maybe this tracks against a comparable previous year, so that as we get a sense, we're trying to get a sense of what future projections are going to be like. I'm just wondering if we're comparing to the right year. Do you have a felt sense about that?
Yeah, so I don't have data for March from 19, so I don't go back that far. We could go back and look at like what a more regular year is, but you're going to have a ton of variability in there, because if we go back to 19, that was an exceptionally wet year. So that's probably going to have very low usage. I think if memory serves, I think in 19 in December, we had 11 inches of rain, and then we had a very, very wet March. I think that was also, if that was about 11. I think it was 11 or more inches of rain in March. So you can go back and compare those things. I guess, Director Schmidt, what's hard to do is pick out what the normal is that we're comparing.
Yeah.
To,
Okay, thank you.
But we can absolutely get you that data if you'd like it. So here we've been breaking out what the usage is by class. So you can see, as you would expect, single family is the main driver out of our total of $8.1 million, and that's $5.1 million of it. And you can see that's up $416,000 over the previous year, comparing March to March of 21 to 20. And then the other area where you see some large decreases in commercial and industrial, and that's down 19%. So that's a pretty substantial decrease. Again, with the recent events that we've had, not surprising there. So total, when you look at all the classes together, our total water usage with all the classes is up about 3%. And then the board has had interest in seeing what our receivable aging is looking like. So these are all the classes starting with 30 days late, going to 1 year late. And it's the same story that you've seen over the course of the fiscal year back to last March, where we've seen obviously our receivable agings, our delinquencies go up as every other water agency has seen. So you can see the 30 days are up by $94,000 compared to the previous year. I will say, however, I went back and looked at the past couple of reports that we've given to the board, and there does seem to be some lessening here, or some, I guess, a little bit of a bright spot. So when I look at the 60-day, we see in March that we had $486,000 in delinquencies. When I go back and look at the last report that we gave the board, which was February's numbers, we were at $870,000. So, the different categories, 30, 60, 90 days, aren't all moving in concert, but we do see in some of the categories that it's actually starting to improve a bit. I think some of that, maybe because we've actually started reminding customers again about delinquency. So we may be seeing some improvement from that. It may be that things are just looking a little bit brighter overall and people are starting to catch up with their bills. But while it's still, when you look at that total there at the bottom, we're over double what we were last March, but it does appear like it's starting to improve somewhat. So a little bit of good news there.
That's good.
And then we isolate that 60-day aging, and we just break that apart here to see how that's reacting by class. And you can see, as you would imagine, the single-family residential is, it's increased as it has in previous months. But you look at the overall 60 days, they've actually decreased compared to February. So that's how we look by individual customer class in thousands of dollars. And we always show you what our tier consumptions look like going back to 2015. And you can see that, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've reached and exceeded the water delivered. What we always point out with this is that if you look at these tiers, about 75% of your usage is in tier 1. So the primary usage by customers in that first tier. So AMI data is another item that we've been looking at. So at the board's behest. So here we look at Tiburon Belvedere AMI data for about 1,200 meters, 1,180 meters. And again, this is for single family residences only. And you can see in those first few months there, January, February, March, we give you data for 2019, 20, and 21. 21, the most recent being that green bar there. And you just kind of see what we've talked about. January this year actually exceeded the previous 2 Januaries. But then as you get into February and March, we've actually seen the real-time AMI data fall off in Tiburon Belvedere. So you can see that we've actually got a substantial decrease of about 23% in February. And as we move into March, we see a 13% decrease in water usage for those 1,180 meters. And then we take another look at that through the lens of the institutional and business meters that we have AMI data for. That's a very small sample size, 84 meters there. But again, as you look over the first 3 months of the fiscal year, January, February, March, and that green line being the most current year, 2021, you see the same patterns there where you see decreased usage compared to the previous year. And in March, we're down about 8.5%.
Does anybody know, are those institutional and business meters all in Tiburon Belvedere?
No, these are throughout the service area, Becker.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the single family residences that are just Tiburon Belvedere.
Okay.
And then looking at the expenditure side here, and again, just kind of keeping in mind that straight line metric of 75% if we're at 3/4 the way through the fiscal year. Personnel services, so wages, benefits, and all those costs, we're about 70%. So we're tracking pretty closely. Probably have some vacancies that are keeping that number a little bit below where we'd expect for the budget. Maintenance and operating expenses, we're 5% ahead of budget. So, a portion of that is that that's where we account for bad debt. And then as we've spoken about, our bad debt expense right now is running about $1.2 million, which is substantially higher than it has in the past. So we've got a little bit more, actual expenditures in that category of maintenance and operating expenses. Financing costs, we just allocate those throughout the year. So that's always going to be right on with the budget. And then our capital allocation, which is the labor cost that we allocate out to capital, that's a 71%. So overall, total operating expenses, we're looking at 73.5% budget. Practically, that's dead on at 75%. Fire flow projects are at 34% of what the budget was at $2.2 million. But again, we'll show you a slide here in a moment that includes accruals. And when we look at the capital side, that actually levels a lot of this out. And then district projects, including purchases like vehicles, that's at 36%. But again, when I show you the next slide here, where we include encumbrances, that actually gives you, I think, a clear view of where we're actually at. So looking just at the budgetary side, we're about 63% of expenditures to budget. And then again, here, we just take those numbers that I just showed you, consolidate them, and then we add in those capital encumbrances. So when you add those in, then you can see you're right on budget. You're 73% of budget. So, we have things in the encumbrances there. We have contract that we just let for the San Geronimo treatment plant generators. We've also got vehicle purchases in there that we've encumbered, but we just haven't received the vehicles yet. So when you add that in, that $11.2 million again, you get a clearer picture, I think, and that shows you're pretty much tracking right with budget. And then finally, we'll talk about ending fund balances. So the restricted and designated fund, that first line item is things like workers' comp and general liability insurance. So there we started out the fiscal year with $21.1 million. We're about $500,000 higher at this point in that fund. But again, that's just based on timing of when we make payments on things like insurance and that. Rate stabilization reserve fund has stayed steady at $9.4 million for quite some time. Fire flow fund has gotten healthier by $300,000 since the beginning of the fiscal year. Pension reserve fund, again, has stayed steady at $2 million. We haven't added or depleted that. And then the capital fund, that's gone from 25.3 down to 19.5, just again, based on what expenditures we made during the year. We expect to draw that fund down as the year goes on. And then operating unrestricted funds, we're at $38.2 million. That's really kind of what we think about as our reserve. So you can see in the line down below, operating fund balance to budget in months. We target 6 months. We're now at 5.3 months. We began the fiscal year 3.7 months. So in the unrestricted fund, we were actually looking very good and actually approaching our policy levels. Debt service coverage is at 3.0. And then outstanding debt, you can see as we start to amortize that debt down, we're down to $142 million. And then other debt, which is a smaller debt issues that we have, or smaller debts that we have with other agencies like Las Colinas is $7 million. So we continue to track what our expenses are from COVID. So far, we've expended $529,000. The biggest portions of that are deep spray of buildings and vehicles. So it's been about $210,000 on that. And additional sick leave is about $181,000. So the preponderance of that is in those two categories. And again, I'll just remind the board that this is not a fiscal year to date like the rest of this presentation. This is since inception of the event. So this is since about last March. So the summary, revenues and expenditures were really, as I showed you, especially when we put in those encumbrances, we're tracking about right on with budget. As we looked at, especially with our operating reserves, our fund balances, right now look healthy, which is good, considering that we're going to have to deal with the revenue impacts of a drought likely. And then the COVID, from a financial aspect, has had a relatively minor impact on the district. And that is my presentation on the financial status. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any further board questions on this item?
I have a quick question, Chuck, on the reserve fund balances.
Mm-hmm.
Is the interest on those fund balances just swept into general capital as opposed to being, sort of kept in that fund balance?
Well, so if the money's in the capital fund, that'll get allocated its interest. If it's in the operating fund, the interest will get allocated there. So we don't take interest that the capital fund is earning and grab it in the general operating fund.
Okay, but the others just get swept into the operating fund.
Yeah, they do. And, I should be clear here. A lot of these, while we, refer to them as funds, they really are not funds from a fund accounting standpoint. They're just designations that the board's made. So they're just going to go to operating.
Okay, all right.
Okay, any further board questions, or we can move to whether there's public comment on this item? Terry?
Yes, Mr. Roger Roberts.
Hello, Roger.
Go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you
Yes.
now, yes.
I believe that we're expecting to have reduced revenue because of less water sales with the conservation measures that we're going to be put into effect. And I wonder what those figures show in relation to the reserves and whether or not the reserves are sufficient or whether you will be short on the comparison. Thank you.
Chuck does have a slide at the next presentation where we're going to talk about it. I don't know, Chuck, if you want to answer in a high level or if it makes sense to wait and talk about it there.
Yeah, we can, I can just, foreshadow it. We think that right now we're planning for about $20 million impairment in revenues. Obviously with the amounts that we have in the stabilization reserve of over $9 million and the operating reserves that we just showed you, we are able to withstand that kind of a revenue hit, but it depends on how long this drought event goes on for. But right now, I think we're okay. And as Ben said, I did prepare a slide in the budget presentation that will address that. But I think right now, looking at the reserves that we have, we are well able to withstand a $20 million 1-year revenue impact.
There aren't any more questions or comments. Sorry.
Okay.
I have a question. That's fine, Chuck, with a 1-year 20 million. What happens if this continues?
I think, should we let him go on, Larry, to this next presentation, which is about the quarterly investment report? Would that be the best place to have that after we've gone through that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I'll leave that up to Chuck.
Yeah, and I don't have a simple answer for that, Director. If this goes on beyond a year, these conversations become more difficult. And as we'll talk about in the budget slide, from the budget presentation, at some point then we have to start looking at actual budgetary solutions where, we start looking at expenditures. And when you start looking at expenditures, you have to look at, where you're going to get the largest cuts, and we probably have to look at personnel budgets and professional services and things like that, and start figuring out where we could make cuts that would be effective. So.
And revenue revenue increase, right?
That's one of the things we mentioned in the slide in the budget presentation is, yeah, there could be revenue solutions that would be implemented also.
Sure. Thank you.
I wanted to provide a 1-minute update on a very related item on the slides that showed the customers in the rears. We had informed the board that we were going to be working with the county on the federal grant they got in terms of the COVID relief. And we've made some headway, and they've indicated that they're moving forward now with rent relief. And they're targeting about 70% of their grant for that purpose. And once they hit 50%, they're going to start opening it up to utilities, both Marin Water as well as North Marin, using our, of course, database on late payments. So we'll be bringing a more detailed update to the board on what that looks like and the associated timing, but it's kind of late breaking news. So I did want to provide you a heads up with that.
Thanks for that, Ben. I just want to be mindful of the time because we have a couple of other items. Is there any more comment on this? or should we move on to the quarterly investment report? Okay, Chuck, I think you're up again.
So this is a look at the quarterly investment update. You have the report as item 3 in your package, or I'm sorry, item 4. And not really a lot to report here, not a lot to change. The only thing I'd point out are a couple of minor things here. If you look at this chart, we show you what the treasuries are looking like out through the 5-year treasury. And one thing that we're seeing here that is potentially good news for us in the future is that yield curve is steepening, which means those longer maturities are starting to earn substantially more than what the short maturities are. So right now, as we tell you in the report, the preponderance of our investment portfolio is in WAVE. About $75 million of it is in the local agency investment fund. The return that we're getting on that continues to decrease. So in January, when we looked at WAVE, we were down to 0.58%. Now we're at 0.41%. So we're still seeing some lagging in WAVE there. But that's just the interest environment that we're in. So on the portfolio overall, we're earning 0.368%. So that's where we are in the investment portfolio.
Okay. Any board comments on this item?
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, it may be good for us, but that's an inverted yield curve, right? When the short term and the long term are reversed like that. So that could be a really bad omen of what's coming for for the economy.
So this yield curve, Director, is a normal yield curve. But yeah, when you see an inverted yield curve where long-term rates actually start to decrease below the short-term rates, yeah, that's often one harbinger of recession. Although not every time, but that is one of the things that indicates coming recession.
Sure.
I've got to pipe up. I do think at some point we need to consider putting some long-term investment into some of the other approved vehicles like Jenny Mae's, which probably get 3 or 4 times that level of interest return. But it's a conversation for another meeting. But
well, I think it's something, Larry, that should be done in the 10-year plan.
Yeah.
I think that was a perfect place for it, Chuck. So I would suggest you include that in one of the 10-year sessions. The other thing that we haven't heard back from you yet, and you promised it would be in the 10-year, is the issue of how to handle the future liability for the retirement funds. Yeah. So, we're looking for that too.
Yeah, and that is something that and reserve levels are something that will be part of the 10-year discussion. Just, yeah, that will be part of the discussion. But again, any solutions that you have there when we talk about long range investment in the district, those solutions require resources, and we're going to be talking about what the prioritization of resources is. So if we start using up resources that we have on capital investments, that's obviously going to take away from the ability that we have to address that liability. But
I think what he's talking about though is just 12.7 million, right? Is putting it in alternative places. Is it 12.7?
Well, the 12.7 million, the report is what we have in the money market fund.
Right, and what Larry's suggesting is
75 million away.
So we have 75 or we have 12?
So in WAVE, your maximum contribution is $75 million.
75, gotcha.
So, right. So you can see we have 74.6. So we're almost maxed out in that. The 12.7 then is what we have in a money market. So it's a different fund than WAVE.
Yeah.
So I think he's talking about those monies, reallocating those monies, not new monies.
Right. And don't confuse the portfolio with the budget. So the fact that we have that money in the portfolio doesn't mean that it's available. So you have an annual budget, you've got capital projects that are outstanding. So this money, a lot of it's already committed. We just haven't used it yet, so it's in the portfolio. So there's a difference. So when you're looking at your, we start to have a discussion about reserve levels, when we talk about the long range forecast, then you can look at things like your operating reserve, that $38 million. And there, if you wanted to use some of those dollars to address the unfunded liability, you could do things like that.
Yeah, and just quickly on the higher yield, you'd have to carve out, a safe amount that you're just putting away to accrue. So it'd be far less than what's in LAIF. LAIF is very flexible. So that's the
Yes.
advantage,
Yeah, WAVE is very flexible and it's very liquid. So we can, we have a large, large payment that we have to make on a capital contract or something like that. We can get our money very quickly out of WAVE.
Yeah, I think it's a good topic for the 10-year discussion.
Yeah, I think, again, we'll get into this in the 10-year, but when you start talking about, things like the pension solutions, you're going to have to look at your reserves and start making some of those balancing decisions.
Okay. Any further board comment on the quarterly investment report? Okay, and Terry, any public comment on this item?
There aren't any raised hands, so no.
Thanks. Thank you, Chuck. I think you're probably on for number 5 as well, which is an information item again on the operating and capital budget for the coming 2 years.
A moment here to find it. Okay, and you can see my screen?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay, so yes, this will be a presentation of the upcoming biennial budget for fiscal years 2021-22 and 22-23. The budget presentation will be remarkably similar to what you saw in the March presentation, the March workshop. To start off, just give you an indication of where we come from. We talked about this at the last meeting, but the budget process really begins in September as we start preparing for putting the budget together. And then we build, going through with the divisions departments, going through general manager review. And finally, we met with the finance committee to go over the preliminary budget in March. That brings us to April now, and we've actually prepared the preliminary budget document and provided it to the board, and it's available on our website, and that's what we're talking about today. So we've taken any input that we got from the board from last time and incorporated into that preliminary budget document. Not a lot of changes within the budget, to be honest. And then if all goes well, we'll come back to the board on May 18th, and we will adopt the budget. So a couple of budget highlights, and again, it's not a very exciting budget. We primarily are focusing on cost containment or status quo this year. We really did not make a lot of additions to the budget. We were conservative in our estimates over the 2 years. We assumed that that our revenues will increase at 4%. As we have in the plan for water sales and for things like the capital maintenance fee. One of the areas where we were able to make some additions, we added 1 ranger per year over the 2 years of the budget. So by the end of it, we have 2 rangers added to the staff. One of the things that helped us do that was that the board had approved a advanced refunding on 2012 bonds. We start to see the effects of that refunding in the second year of the budget. So we get about $500,000 in savings. So that will be ongoing, and that helps out the budget tremendously. And then there's some smaller things that we provided funding for. We had the water shed recreation plan. So we budgeted $400,000 in that over the 2 years. And then we had a couple of water quality studies that were done. One of those is looking at lake algae, and we budgeted $300,000 for those studies. So this is taken directly out of attachment 1 to item 5, which is the preliminary budget document. And this just gives you a breakdown of what our revenues are looking like for the first year. So they're $111.4 million. And, as we would imagine, the preponderance of that, about 53% comes out of water sales. And then you can see that the next biggest piece of that at 20% is the service charges here. And then we've got things like the CMF is this 15.6% here. And then we've got things like fire flow, watershed, and some of the smaller items there. But between CMF and water sales and service charges, that's most of where your revenues are coming for the budget. And then we flip and look at the total expenditures for the first year of the 2-year budget, and those are at $114.8 million. You'll notice that those exceed revenues a bit. That does not mean we're out of balance, but when we went to the capital maintenance fee, we're now primarily funding our capital projects on a pay-go basis. So the timing of the revenues and the timing of the expenditures are not necessarily going to match up in a single year. And again,
Chuck, if I can just interrupt here for a second. When we're talking fire flow here, we're not talking about the fire flow fund, that's totally separate accounting. Am I right about that? This is when you talk, what do you mean by fire flow in this
those
context?
are revenues that are coming from that fire flow fee. So that's that $75 fixed fee that we collect through property taxes. That's what that is.
Well, I understood those to be outside of our own accounting process. Not so anymore?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the $4.5 million that we get out of fire flow fees.
Okay.
And by the way, when you see me looking to my right here, Mick Young has joined me, who does a lot of work on this. So she's obviously providing some input here. So total expenditures, the big blue portion of the pie here, that 77%, that's the operating expenditures. So if you're looking at your budget document, I think it's page 12, it's got the district overview, but you can kind of see what the major components of operating are. It's really everything. You've got everything in there from construction contracts to personnel, conservation budgets in there, professional fees, everything. Most of what we do is on the operating side, and that's in that portion. And then the other big portion there is that 17.7%, that green portion of the pie, that's capital expenditures. And between the two of those, that makes up most of what this budget is. You can see that 3.9% there is the fire flow that we just talked about. And then capital purchases, that 1.1% there, that's primarily things like purchases for fleet. You can see we're $114.8 million. And then quickly, just turning to the second year of biennial budget, same breakdowns that you see here, revenues of $115.6 million, and those are servicing expenditures of $116.1 million. And the composition of the revenues and the expenditures are really identical to the first year. So I just tried to kind of simplify what we have in the budget into the single table, so you get a kind of a snapshot of the 2 years. So as we just talked about, we have revenues of $111 million, serving expenses of $114.8 million. So so that means we're drawing down on fund balances, primarily from the capital fund balance, to $3.4 million. And you can see how the expenses are broken out here: operating expenses, capital purchases, again, things like fleet purchases and CIP. And then in year 2, we have $115.6 million of revenues servicing $116.1 million of expenses. So we draw less in that year of $500,000 from fund balances. And then you can see the composition of those. So again, this table is available in the staff report, and I think in the actual budget document itself. So I just kind of walk through real quickly. So you can see the first 2 years, we give you an actual, we give you what the adopted budget was for the year that we're in now, that we're in on June 30th. And then these last 2 columns here are the upcoming individual years of biennial budget. So personnel services in the first year, you can see those go up by about 2.3%. Pretty small increase, really, and most of that, remember, is going to come from things like our like COLA increases and step increases. General and admin, you see those are going up by 12.4%, compared to the adopted budget for the current year that we're in. And I think we spoke about this a bit in the last meeting, and I'll show you a slide here in a moment that breaks these out, but a lot of the drivers in there, we've got insurance costs that are going up, and then we see things like taxes, fee, licenses from other agencies when we go do work are going up. So we've seen some bump in that. But again, when you break it down, it's a $600,000 increase, so it's not tremendously big. Materials and supplies, we've seen actually a minor decrease in that. And then operations is up by 11.5%. A lot of that is from professional fees that we've seen added in there. So when you think back to the first slide that I showed you, and we talked about some of those new things that we've done, those studies, those are added into this category. So you're going to see some increase in operations cost. Debt service is it goes down modestly in the first year of the budget, and then that second year you can see where it drops from 10.2 million down to 9.7. I told you have that $500,000 annual savings. That's where you really start to see that in the second year of the budget. So total operating budget overall, pretty modest increase. We're increasing by about 3% in the first year and about 4% in the second year. And then capital and fire flow expenditures go up by about 20% in the first year. And then they actually drop off in the second year compared to the 22 budget. So total, when you put it all together, in the first year, we got 6.4% increase in the budget. In the second year, we have a 1.1% increase. I highlighted that 116.1. I told you there were almost no changes from the budget that we showed you previously. One thing that we did change was on the capital side. We added $1.5 million into capital expenses in the second year of the budget, and that was for storage tanks. So there's some additional work that was added in there. So we add that in the budget. And I think that is really the only change that I can think of from the last iteration that we showed you. So revenue comparisons, everything's pretty much status quo. You can see water sales. We had it $81.6 million for the current year. They dropped down to $81 million next year. And as we talked to the board last time about, we thought that this current year that we were in was a little bit anomalous with COVID and with a very dry year. So we actually kind of snapped that estimate back to normal in the next year. Again, as we talked about earlier, this $81 million estimate in water sales obviously does not include any projected impairments that we're going to see from the drought. And then the only other thing to really note here that you'll see is the other capital contribution here on the bottom, which is a relatively small number, is dropped off. And I think what we're seeing there is we're just seeing less new connections for new customers. So total revenues are pretty stable, moving from $110.7 million in the current year up to $111.4 million and $115.6 in the second year of the budget.
I don't understand, Chuck. You're saying 21, 22, you don't reflect the drought, if I understood
Right.
it, the 81 million?
Right.
And
so
why
that
is that?
81 million, right. So that $81 million, that $20 million impairment is not included in there. So, if we did that, we'd take this down to $61 million. We did not do that for the budget.
And what's the logic that it goes up to 84 in 22? What's that based on?
But that's based on, so remember we said that we assumed a 4% increase in revenues or 4% increase in rates. So that's what that's based on.
Okay. But it's not based on projected usage. It's just a mechanical.
It's based on our projected usage, which is, very, very difficult to forecast what's actually going to happen in 2022.
Sure. But when you say our, are you talking about engineering's estimate or finance estimate?
Finance estimate. Yeah.
And is that coordinated with engineering or with hydrology or however you want to put it?
Yeah. When we do. But we kind of normalize these when we get into the out years because we just don't know. Like in the current year that we're in, you remember we kind of went back and we looked at, we kind of redid the budget because we saw that, we knew that it was a dry year and COVID and everything else was driving up the usage. So we adjusted that usage based on that history. But that's what we did.
COVID doesn't drive up the usage. I mean, the amount of water used for washing hands and things is trivial. It's all in outdoor irrigation. So I don't think that statement is correct at all. COVID takes the usage down, not up.
I disagree with that because when kids are not in school and everybody's staying home, domestic usage does go up.
Yeah, but not significantly, Larry. That's the thing. I mean, amount of water used for washing hands is trivial. Let's look at the Tiburon data. We have actual data to evaluate it, and that's what we should be talking about here.
I think if you go back and look at it, you'll see it did go up.
No, but I'm saying we should have that in the presentation to see what the quantitative numbers are as opposed to rubbing tummy.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are going to be different perceptions about this. So having actual numbers would be useful. I mean, I think obviously you're both right. People are home more, so there's going to be more home use. The question is, how significant is it? It is, hand washing and toilet flushing and more cooking and that kind of thing. But it's unlikely to involve a lot more outdoor watering, for example. So I think actually getting those numbers so we can get our arms around what's happening in the different communities would be useful.
And the other thing is, if people are in Marin, whether they flush the toilet at the office or flush the toilet at home, it's the same impact. The same number of toilet flushes.
Right, but not everybody is, right?
Yeah, there's also a lot of people who would otherwise be commuting into San Francisco and whatnot, and they're not flushing the toilet in San Francisco, they're flushing it here. But I think that getting a better handle on these numbers and maybe the range so that we have a better sense would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
no point arguing about stuff when we can get the numbers.
Yeah.
So just keep in mind these numbers are based on our best forecast. We go back and look at the past several years, and when we're forecasting this out, especially in the second year, we're basing it on what those years are averaging and what we expect by month what the usage will be. So because we don't know, if there's so many variables that could affect, we at some point have to give a reasonable number for a revenue estimate. And we really base that on historically what happened. And just, we've showed, in the last presentation, you can see, our usage, is definitely up. We're up about 3%. We don't know what all of that is, but I would assume on the single family side, we're seeing a 9% increase in usage. It's hard some of that could be a bit of a drier year, but I would think that some of that must be related to as Director Bragman pointed out, people staying at home and using more water in the single family residence, I imagine.
Chuck, bring back the data. But I agree that we did see, even during the winter months, an elevated use in the midst of the pandemic in the residential that offset the decrease in commercial. But we'll bring that back and review it with the board.
Yeah, and remember, with the AMI data, you can actually look when the water was used, huh? So if the water is being used from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., it's probably irrigation.
Right.
So we have a lot of data in our hands from 2,800 homes. Now, that may not be representative of the whole community, but it's at least a good piece of data, but I don't feel we're using it at all. And it seems to me, Chuck, what I heard you say is exactly the opposite of what you just said. You said that the change from 81 to 84 was based on a 4% increase in rates.
Right.
Not on a usage change.
Right.
If I understood you.
But the usage change is going to be captured, Director Russell, by historical data. So again, we're projecting the future based on what's happened in the past. And we're really just taking average of the past and saying this is what we think usage was like. So when we're doing usage for 21, 22 and 22, 23, from a usage standpoint, that's probably not going to change that much because I don't know what variables would change that usage in 22, 23, unless it was, some kind of, new development or something like that. I don't know whether that's going to be a dry year or a wet year. We at some point.
Sure, of course. We understand that.
Chuck, if I could just clarify, I believe if you look at that line on water sales, Director Russell, what Chuck was saying is you are not seeing the expected increase due to the 4% increase in revenues from the estimated 2021 compared to 21, 22. And the reason you aren't seeing that 4% increases, we discounted it a bit because what we're projecting this year is partly attributed to the increase due to COVID, but we'll break out the details and bring that back for you.
Okay, we also,
Okay.
one other element of this too, is that we are asking people to significantly cut back on water in the coming months and into this next year. I would be very curious to see what our revenue projection, our water sales would be if people do what we ask, and to see how that substantially changes our revenue.
What we do have a slide coming up that talks about our projected revenue deficit this coming year in different ways we can think about addressing it in this presentation.
Well, but FY 21-22 starts, if I'm correct, in July. So it is that, for July through the dry season, we are asking people to cut back substantially on both domestic and outside water use. And it strikes me that if people do as we're asking, that's going to have a substantial decrease in water sales, and it'd be great to see what that number looks like.
Absolutely. And it does bring up kind of an important point that's worth reinforcing, I believe, for the board, that this budget development began in October, November timeframe, well before we understood the drought we would be in. So we made the choice, as we've talked about at the last meeting and touched on this one, not to shift the entire budget based on a drought that we anticipate, or at least very much hope, will be a one-time, and instead bring forward a budget as we had developed, with the understanding that we'll be talking to the board about cost controls and use of reserves to address the deficit, but that's not reflected directly in the budget.
Yeah, and just, keep in mind, when I show you revenues, the budget is an actual budget. These are projections, and these are going to change all the time. And, when we look even at 21-22, anything could change during the year, or we have a, increase in rainfall that could just mitigate those financial impacts of the drought. So we're just kind of making the best guess here.
I'll take that bet. We understand, Chuck, these are difficult things to do, but we need to be clear when it's science-based or when it's just accounting-based, because I looked at those numbers, 84 and 81, it's 3.7%, which jives exactly with what you said, a 4% rate increase, which is fine, but put the numbers where they belong. That, if you really massage the numbers to get a good flow, that's fine. If you just use the current usage, that's fine too, and you adjusted it by what you anticipate the rate increase to be, that's also fine. But let's not conflate the two unless there's more to this than is showing up to me.
No, and again, this is very simple. At the simple level, this is basically us looking back at the past, averaging it, and using that as our future forecast.
Yeah, and I think we need to be very, very careful, as I've said about the projections for the rainfall. I'm not sure, having a PhD in part in hydrology, that we can look back. I mean, civil engineers like to do this. We like to predict 1,000-year storms with 100 years of data. But the reality is that it's only 100 years of data. And, this is just like the financial one that says past performance is no guarantee of future. This is the same thing. If we're indeed in a fundamentally different time with climate change, which looks to me that we are, we got to be really, really careful about depending on the past.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to prolong the agony of this discussion, but Jack and I had attended a 2-day seminar, and one of the speakers was this young climate scientist, Swain. And it was very interesting because he said averages don't matter. What he felt the predictive weather patterns would be, they might fit in averages, but much higher peaks and much higher lows. So, so a very irregular pattern.
Yeah.
Stated differently, it says, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
but total precipitation, it may be average, but you could have fires and floods like they had last year in Southern California. So anyway.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah, and from a budget perspective, when we're building the projections, it would be impossible to, unless we got in some sort of, linear regression models where we look at that kind of stuff, and those would probably be wrong 9 times out of 10. So.
Right.
Any more on this slide?
None from me.
Okay. Okay, and then you've kind of seen this on a previous slide, but just breaking out some of the things that are the drivers for these different major components of the budget. So personnel services, as we mentioned, big driver there is just the annual COLAs that we do, step increases that employees have during the year. We have seen health insurance, going up. We see pension costs going up. So those are some of the things that are driving personnel services. But not a tremendous increase in there. 2.3% is as we mentioned, very, very much in line with the status quo budget. The G&A budget's up by 12.4%. And again, we talked about those increased permit fees that we're paying to other governments. We've seen an increase in bank fees. And then insurance costs is one that went up in the past year. And we'll bring that to the board again, I think in June, but I think we're going to see some increases in our insurance costs again this year. So we're projecting those. Materials.
Is it
Go ahead.
possible, Chuck, to negotiate the bank fees, like go to another bank?
It's possible. It is a very, very onerous process. And normally, what I've seen normally is what agencies will do is go out for a request for proposals. And a lot of times what that will do is get them better fees with your existing bank.
Of course, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I won't get into all the particulars here, but if you switch actual banks with all the systems that we use associated with those, it is a tremendous undertaking, often not worth the amount that you would save. And, anyways, I'll leave it there, but yeah.
I'm only responding to your comment that one of the reasons for the 12.4% increase is the second item, increase in bank fees. That's what I'm responding to.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that too, remember, is that we have more customers now using credit cards and things like that. So we're going to see some increase there too.
Well, that's excellent comment. I mean, well, why don't we do what a lot of agencies do and apply the fee? Let's put the 2% or 2.5 or whatever we're paying onto the bill. And if you want to use a credit card, that's fine. You pay the fee.
Yeah. So again, Director, I won't get into the particulars on that. There are ways to do that. We cannot pass through the fee through our vendors. We'd have to go through a third party if we did something like that. But again, beyond the scope of this discussion.
Okay.
We can talk about that more, but yeah, there's some, that it's.
And Director Russell, that's always the balance of encouraging folks to do online bill payment for all the benefits it provides us in terms of postage and labor and staff. And then with a disincentive of requiring them to pay the fee and taking a look at, what really makes sense from a customer standpoint and from the overall economics, but we can certainly take a look at that.
Well, the trade-off, Ben, I mean, I can't imagine, I can't remember a single government agency that I do business with, which is about 50 states or 40 states, that doesn't charge that fee. And the city of San Francisco charges it. I think the county of Marin charges it. If you use a credit card to pay like your business license fee, there's a whack. And if you want to let them use an ATM card as opposed to a credit card, that fee drops down to like 0.4% instead of 2.2%. So, I mean, I understand these things are difficult, but when I'm seeing numbers like 12.4% increase, And okay, we can't do anything about the permit fees. Okay, we can go complain to the agencies about them, which I don't think we've done. And can't do much about insurance costs except price it around. But the one in the middle is the one that's catching my eye, which is let's see what we can do about those bank fees. I don't know, what is the total G&A budget roughly? Just roughly.
Total G&A's $5.4 million.
So you're talking about $500,000 in that 12.4%. I don't know what percentage is bank fees, but it sounds to me like there's enough.
The credit card fees are not going to be a big part of that. And I don't want to prolong this either because I actually have to go soon, but I mean, we want our customers to pay online. And I think there's a real difference between San Francisco charging for business permits and hitting our customers to pay their water bills, their very essential water bills, for credit card fees. I think from a customer relations perspective, from a partnership perspective, we are entering a phase more and more where we need to be partnering with particularly our residential customers.
But isn't that
it's nickel and diming them, and it's not going to do us much good on the bottom line, and it's going to annoy people.
But isn't that a violation of 218 because we're now subsidizing other users? Where do the fees come from that pay the credit card fees?
No, it is definitely not a 218.
No, it's not
violation, and I don't want to go there right now, but I am confident it is not a 218 violation.
Yeah, I believe this is open to all customers, and they have a choice whether or not. But why don't we'll take a look at it and at the right time revisit what the costs look like and what the operational savings look like from people paying online, and bring that back at a future meeting.
Right. I just think it's small stuff, Larry, as you would say. How do you put it? You say it all the time, chump change.
Chump change. Yes, I do. But 500,000 isn't chump change. Okay.
But this isn't 500,000. The credit card fees are not $500,000.
It's the second listed item. I have to presume they're in order of importance in cost. Maybe they're not.
I don't think you mean bank. I don't think bank fees is exclusively credit card charges. Is it, Chuck?
No, it's not exclusively credit charges, but that's
right.
A lot of what it is now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I'm going to ask if we can move on. I have a hard stop coming right up.
Okay, so materials supplies there, that we know supplies chemical costs have gone up. You can see that in the budget. We did in the budget, we took the purchases that we make from Sonoma Water to the 5,300 minimum level. So that's why you see a little bit of a decrease in materials and supplies. And then operations, we had some increases. Again, we added some studies in for professional fees. And then paid-in costs, we talked about last time, is an item that we've seen increase in, and we just never really addressed it in previous budgets. We thought it might be a one-time increase, but appears to be ongoing. So
that I don't not understand at all, Chuck. And I'm sorry that I hung up on this, Cynthia, but we're getting ready to spend $1 million to upgrade the Castagna pump station in order to deliver 5 million gallons a day more water from Sonoma County. And you're decreasing the Sonoma County purchases? I don't understand that. I mean, that might be wishful thinking, but why are we spending the $1 million?
We just budgeted it what the minimum is in the contract, 5,300, which I think what we normally do. And then
Okay, I'm just trying to indicate it's a little more complicated than that. Okay,
that's all. It absolutely is. Yep.
This is not a drought budget.
Right.
That's true, Larry.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we looked at what the authorized positions were. So again, we're taking full times up from 240 currently to 242 over the 2 years. That's the addition of those two rangers we talked about. And I just thought it'd be useful to go back and look at kind of a longer view of what the district's done with full-time positions. And we've been very stable since fiscal year 12-13. Before that, we actually made substantial cuts in district staff. And then real quickly, we just wanted to give the board a snapshot of comparative reserves, how we look over the next few years. Insurance policy reserve, It's just 6 times the self-insured retention of $1 million. So that's the $6 million. Workers' comp reserve fund is just based on the balance set by the actuaries. And then the capital reserve fund will stay pretty stable at 20 million, drops down to $19 million in 22-23, just based on that additional expenditures that we made for storage tanks. Pension reserve fund, we don't see changing. Rate stabilization fund, again, that may get dipped into as we address the drought, but that's available to us. And the operating reserve, we projected $34 million for the 2 years of the budget. So you can see the debt service coverage ratios remain healthy at 3 and 3.5 over the 2 years of budget, well above our policy levels. And then potential drought responses. So here's that what Ben referred to. So our projection on the impact of the drought is $20 million. That obviously could vary either way substantially. But when we look at what we have available to us to address that deficit and get us through at least a limited drought period, we do have the rate stabilization fund of $9.4 million that we can dip into. We do have operating reserves that we project in the next 2 years of $34 million that we could dip into. I put the pension reserve down there in dashed lines because it wouldn't be preferred. But remember that's something that's established by the board, and that could be used if we needed for deficit to fill that $20 million hole. And then on the other side there, we've got budgetary solutions, and that obviously is just a fancy word for cuts. And again, we'd have to really start digging into our budget, $111 million, and figuring out, how we could shave some savings off there. And then as the board brought up earlier, we do also have an option, and again, dashed lines of establishing drought rates or having some sort of a revenue solution to address that deficit. And that would be something we'd probably start looking at, especially if we expected the financial impacts of this drought to go on for some time. Okay, and then preliminary CIP budget discussion. Again, really not a lot of changes since we spoke last time, so I pared this down quite a bit. The budget's really dedicated to renewal and replacement. You'll have 2 components within the budget document. You have a 10-year plan. It's not a budget, it's just a plan. And then the first 2 years of that are actually what we're authorizing appropriations from. So that's the actual budget portion of that 10-year plan. This is what expenditures look like, $26.1 million in 21-22, $23.9 million. We average about $25.5 million over the 10 years of the 10-year plan. Just a snapshot of the first 2 years, really pretty much identical to what we showed you last time. Again, the only change is $1.5 million added in 23 for those storage tanks. So that brings it from $48.5 million that we showed you last time up to $50 million. 2-year CIP, this is how it breaks out. Pipeline, $17.9 million, storage tanks and cathodic protection at 10.4. And then you see it totals up to $50 million. And again, this is over both years of the budget, so about $25 million a year. And then again, last time we kind of went through and highlighted these projects in more detail. This is just a snapshot summary of them. Some of the bigger projects that we have. So we talked about the Green Bay boardwalk, 2,200 feet of welded steel, 50 years old, so they're replacing that. We've got the 3rd Street pipe replacement plan, and that's being done in conjunction with the street paving project that the city of San Rafael has. And I think that's 90-year-old pipe that's being replaced. Ridge Road Fire Flow Improvement Project, 4,800 feet of 70-year-old pipe that's being replaced. And then one of the big projects that we have in the CIPs is the Smith Saddle Tank Rehabilitation Project. So those are going to be rehabbing one tank per year over the 2 years of the budget. And then we have some treatment plant projects that we've got going on, Bontempi Clearwell Repair Project, and then obviously the San Geronimo Treatment Plant Emergency Generator Projects, one that's built into this capital improvement program budget. So that's the capital improvement program. I think that Mr. Bond and Alicia are on the call. So if there are specific questions on CIP, but that is the budget for the next 2 years, and happy to take any questions.
Any further board questions on this item?
Chuck, and this is also to Ben. I know we capitalize some operations, rightfully so, operational type activity that applies to capital projects. The one thing this budget shows is I think the wisdom of the CMF, because that's not affected by water consumption, which is why we did it. And I guess my question is whether we can increase capitalizing some of our operations so that we can use those funds and bond fund some of the capital projects that we have on tap. So it would provide some operating revenue to kind of make up for the drought loss of money. So it's just something to think about as far as how we go on, funding, using the CMF and maybe getting some greater flexibility out of it to make up for the expected loss of revenue associated with the drought. If you can follow all that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely, Director Bragman. When we instituted the CMF expressly in the 218 notice, we stated that it would only be used for capital. However, we did add and potentially for debt service, and I'll come back to that. In terms of the operating activities that we charge to capital, those are really consistent with GASB and all the standards Chuck could talk about. So for example, if an engineer is designing a capital project, that labor is funded. If we're replacing capital equipment that meets the standards that it's going to have a certain life and it costs a certain amount, we do now fund that in capital. So we really don't have a lot of opportunity outside of what we're doing, other than if the board chose, in terms of this drought where we wanted some relief, I believe we could use a CMF to fund a part or all of our annual debt service payments that would provide some relief on the operating side. Of course, the cost of that would be slowing down these critical capital projects that we're talking about enhancing. So there's no easy, answer, but generally, I think
it might fill the gap, assuming we're not going into some epical drought for, the next 3 years. But if it's, if it turns out to be a 1-year drought or 2-year drought, it's just something to think about that would give us greater flexibility. And, just a question on the purchase of the new computer system. Is that a capital purchase?
That is a capital purchase, but that's, are you talking about the item we talked about earlier? Or are you talking about replacement? Yeah, that's capital purchase, but that was already in IT's budget.
Okay.
That wasn't an additional cost.
Yeah. Anyway, the idea is, as Ben described, sort of, if we can switch some of the expenses around to relieve operations, I think we should look into that.
Yeah, and just, the amount that we allocate from operations to capital in the projects obviously going to be driven by the number of projects we have in the projects. So.
Right, but like that debt service payment, that would be an interesting little stopgap, maybe for the next budget. So.
Yeah, and yep.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, the big opportunity we have on capitalizing, and Ben and I have talked about this a few times, but we haven't moved forward on it, is that GASB has made it clear that we can use debt. We can specifically use municipal bonds to finance our rebate programs. And so that's something we've discussed a little bit in the context of the larger 10-year plan, but I'd like to see that. It's a specific clarification that they issued now almost exactly 3 years ago. So we have not taken advantage of that. And since we need to be moving more aggressively into consumer rebates, if we're going to get through the drought and build climate resilience in the long term, that's a very, very significant opportunity for us to be really engaging in, much greater generational equity, for those sorts of programs. So I'd like to see the next iteration of this budget include that.
Yeah, so that's another opportunity of being nimble, with capitalization. So I think that's something we really need to digest and consider. So
Any
very
other board? Sorry. Any other board questions or comments on the 22-23 budget? I just want to make sure we have time for public comment on this item. Terry, is there any public comment on this item?
Let me check. I believe Mr. Roberts may have something, but let me unmute him. Mr. Roberts?
Yes, just a comment. This was a very interesting presentation today, and I want to thank the staff for the thoroughness of it. But a comment I would like to make in terms of the budgeting. If you applied probability theory practices to the budget, it would be quite simple to apply to the revenue projections a range of possible effects from climate change or whatever you want to consider to show what the impact of the revenue would be. So it's not a real serious problem, but it would be useful in terms of understanding the range of outcomes that you may be facing.
Thank you. There aren't any more comments.
Okay, then I believe we are at the end of the agenda that we have for today. Unless, Ben, do you have anything else?
No, I don't.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chuck.
All right,
Thank you.
Mhm.